G'day, I'm Peter Anthony. Welcome to Growth Tales. When I coach people, a goal that often comes up is people like you wanting to have more ideal days. But we think about ideal days as only happening occasionally, if at all. But what if you could have more ideal days more often? That's a question I discussed with Duncan Young. Duncan is a motivational speaker, a wellbeing habit change leader, and a world-class coach. And his specialty is helping his clients have more ideal days. And Duncan also happens to be a mate of mine in our bold and beautiful ocean swim group. So I was curious in talking with Duncan to get his ideas on how we can have more ideal days more often. Expect to learn the role of meaningful connection, exercise and optimism, and how maybe the tiny steps could give us the biggest results. I think you'll enjoy our conversation. G'day, Duncan. Welcome to Growth Tales. I'm really curious. We're talking today about designing your ideal day, but ideal sounds like a big stretch. How do you think about that?
Well, we've got a product called Build Your Ideal Day, so it is very close to designing your ideal day, and that's the whole intention of it. But we actually are trying to get people to live their best lives, and your best life is different to my best life.
Yeah.
Really what we're trying to do is get people to think about the small intentional choices they can make in order to build what is ideal for them.
Okay.
And these are the small intentional choices we make each day.
Yeah, that's true. 'Cause I was curious because one of the things I spend a lot of time studying is personality. And I think of like personality traits. So I'm thinking like an ideal day for an introverted engineer might be different than the ideal day for an extroverted salesperson or CEO. So it's highly contextual, right?
It is like, as I said, it's a skill of daily intentions, and it's no use me designing my ideal day that is best for you. It's a really personalized thing. So this is really about leaning into your strengths, what's worked well in the past, and what that will indicate what might work well in the future. That's why we swim every day, because initially I was a good swimmer. And what do you do for your health and well-being? I try and swim every day. So I'm not good at running. I'm not running every day. I'm leaning into what my skills are, which is I'm a handy swimmer.
Yes, which is one thing we've got in common. We both swim in the bold and beautiful swim group. And I guess if you think of an ideal day, something like swimming in the ocean with friends, it ticks a few boxes, doesn't it? It ticks the exercise box, the outdoor box, and it ticks the friendship and relationship box, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. You know, I used to think as a swimming group, but I've really now worked out it's a coffee drinking group after you swim. So these groups are really, really important. But, you know, if you get the park runs of the world and you get the bold and beautiful, of course, we swim the Drinks Express, the slightly earlier version. But it's really about doing a shared activity with like-minded people. You're more likely to talk to them. You've got something in common to start with. So really it's about leaning into the kind of things that you like doing. And over time, you build these relationships and friendships, and they're really important, as we know, for both longevity and life satisfaction.
Yes. So given that we are all different and we are unique, how do we go about designing an ideal day? Like what are the overarching guidelines, if you like, that you recommend in designing an ideal day?
Well, that's a great question. And if listeners had time, I could take you through the 90-minute workshop. But let's just look at it from a high level. We use a theory called appreciative inquiry. It's a 4D process, and it's about discover, dream, design, and deploy. And it's really about thinking about what's worked well in the past for you, then thinking about if you were living a fully abundant life, what would you be doing? What then might you do, you know, to move towards that goal, and what might you do tomorrow? So it's really about understanding what your strengths are, projecting yourself fast forward to what your best possible life could be, and then just doing small elements to build towards that.
Okay. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes for how people can connect with you or contact you to do that workshop, because it sounds like an ideal way to spend 90 minutes on the ideal.
I've actually got a shorter one too, which is the 7 habits to build your ideal day. So we'll probably start there. And that's a really good shortcut or entry level for people looking to enhance their well-being.
So you've mentioned 2 time frames there, or 2 perspectives, if you like. You've talked about the past and the future. So looking at the past and thinking, what in the past have I done that's ideal that I should replicate or do more of? And I guess what I did that I should do less of or avoid.
Mm.
But you're also looking at the future and thinking, well, what does a future ideal day look like for me? So how do I balance those two things, the past and the future?
Well, I think the past is going to give you some indications of what has worked in the past. And that's a question we ask, when you've had times in your life where you've had ideal or great well-being, what were you doing? So it's going to give some indication. And then when you layer on your strengths, so two types of strengths. What are your strengths? I'm a good swimmer, hopeless speller. But what gives you strength? What gives you joy, happiness, excitement to actually do the things you want to do? So by looking at the past and adding on that strength lens, it can often predict the kind of future you want to make. And of course, Pete, as you know, the future is what you make of it. It's not determined for you, and you can shape that.
Yeah, it's very much a blank canvas, isn't it? And it's interesting when you talk about strengths. A lot of people I've coached talk about strengths as things that they do well, but often if you do something well, it's not necessarily a strength, because you could be doing it really well, but you actually don't enjoy doing it at all.
Yeah,
you've learned to do it well. Like through your role, you've learned to be a very disciplined timekeeper, or you've learned to be like excellent at managing things with Excel. You've learned that's a strength, if you like. It's something I do well, but I actually don't like it at all. I do it because I have to. So there must be aspects of the ideal day that you don't like. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think there's a broader piece there. So people focus on what they want, but what creates that might be something different. So I always say to people, say, hey, Duncan, you swim every day. How can I be a better swimmer? So spend all their time watching YouTube videos and strength, strokes per 100 and all that kind of stuff. But how you become a better swimmer is just turning up to swimming. And to turn up to swimming, you need to wake up at 5:30, walk the greyhound, go to swimming. And that means you need to go to bed at 9:30. So the actual key thing to improving your swimming is going to bed at 9:30, quietening the mind with a book so you get a good night's recovery, and then turning up to swimming. So we often focus on the actual activity. It's all the things before that, the prep, if you like, that gets you there.
Okay. That sounds like the secret sauce to the ideal day. It's not the actual day, it's the night before or the day before.
Yeah, well, we before the show started, we had a quick chat like that. If you look at the likes of Angela Duckworth, she's famous for a book called Grit, and she is very keen on the idea that you can't plan and execute in the same day. So if you want to make a change in your life, what we're trying to do is make a small change in our life from where we are today to where we want to be. You can plan that today, but you've got to execute tomorrow. If you wake up tomorrow morning and go, I wonder what I'll do to build my ideal, the likelihood is it won't happen. But if you plan the day before, put your wetsuit at the front door, you've got the dog lead ready, all that kind of stuff, makes it easier to swim the next day if that's your chosen thing.
Yes. And I like to not give myself a choice. So once I plan my day, unless something quite disastrous happens, it's all about waking up and executing. It's about saying, well, I plan to swim, so I'm going to swim. Unless there's a cyclone or a member of the family's ill, I swim. And it's, I've decided, and I guess curious about your thoughts on this, because there's different versions of us, right? There's different versions of Duncan, there's different versions of Peter. There's a lazy version of me. There's a quite focused version of me. I'm thinking the really focused, well-intentioned version made this plan. So I'm going to allow him to take control and not the lazy guy that wants to sleep in and not swim. Yeah. So I'm deferring to the better version of me to make these decisions and not the lazy version. Is that part of the ideal day or part of how you execute?
Look, I think it's very complicated. I think, different times of the year, different days of the week, you have different energy levels. And a lot of the time we're just trying to manage our energy level, whether that's through better recovery or things like that. But the key thing is we don't want to be black and white. A good example is people say to me, my aspiration, Duncan, is to not drink alcohol for 6 months. I go, well, that's a lofty aspiration, but, often I get to 3 months and say, all right, I'm a failure. I had some drinks. And I said, well, your aspiration was to drink less. So you've agreed, you've already ticked that box, gone 90 days without booze. But really what we should have coached them to have this their aspiration is to do the thing that is replacing alcohol. So I want to spend more time with my family having quality conversations. I want to spend more time working on my hobbies. And that's what you get when you don't drink alcohol, but they're focusing on this negative. And when they fail, it's either a pass or fail. So I think
Yeah.
habit changes, you really need to be gentle with people. So I'm going to share a secret with you, Pete, that I say to most people I swim every day. But the
Yeah.
reality is I turn up to swimming every day and I might do what we call a tea bag, just jump in the water and jump out,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
I might do a 5K swim. So technically I tick the box to earn my coffee, but I don't commit to swimming a 1500 every morning at 6:30 because that's very finite. And when you've got other
Yeah.
things on your life, you need to give yourself some flexibility.
That's right. Yeah. Plus, the conditions might change. Like this morning, there was some blue bottles around, for example. The
Yeah,
ocean could be huge and just too dangerous to try and swim out through it. So
correct.
sometimes and it's often the social contact we're looking for as much as the actual swimming part, which is makes it interesting. But just cycling back to the alcohol, I've had this conversation with lots of people too because I've given up alcohol for long periods of time, like for a year and more at a time. That was more for health reasons than anything else. But when I hear people talk about alcohol, they say, I'm giving up alcohol. And I like to say to them, look, maybe you could also think about like what you are gaining, not what you are giving up. Like you're gaining
Yeah, of
self-respect, you're
course.
gaining health, you're gaining more money in your wallet, you're gaining more intelligent conversation, you're gaining
Yeah,
not making stupid decisions after too many drinks,
yeah,
rather than giving it up.
yeah.
Yeah,
We obviously don't want to be demonizing anyone that drinks alcohol. I still drink alcohol on a regular basis, but you're more likely to succeed in habit changing or coaching psychology if we can focus on the positive outcomes versus a finite, black
yeah,
and white, negative outcome.
yeah. So focusing on the gain, not the
Yeah,
loss.
yeah,
What I'm moving towards rather than what I'm moving away from. And
yeah.
I'm curious too, Duncan. When you talk about habits, I understand you're a big fan with this ideal day with like micro habits or little habits rather than big global changes. Like make tiny ones. Is that true with this ideal day?
Yeah, so the statistics are that 70% of all of your actions are influenced by your environment. So that's a
Yeah.
UK sport research study. We know that 40% of all of your daily actions are habits. So
Wow.
we know that habits are tremendously complicated. Not going to sort of demonize habits. There are good habits and bad habits. Obviously, the bad habits give you instant response. So let's say, for example, you eat a chocolate bar, instant sugar rush, happy days. You get home, you have a glass of wine, you're a bit frazzled, instant calmness. You get that instant response. You do a good habit, which is like legs day in the gym, you're sore for 2 weeks. There's nothing
Yeah. Yeah.
immediate about it than pain. But the good habit actually helps you in the long term. So we
Okay.
need to break the change down. We call it bridging the gap. The gap is between where you are now and where you want to be with a very small change. And you only need to look back at the theory of marginal gains. This is David Brailsford. They made a 1% change and they won 7 of the 8 Tour de France. It's really small things like, pillow density, how the riders shook hands, aerodynamics on the bike, all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But if we can get people to do these tiny changes, it actually just moves you towards. And of course,
Mm.
1% change made daily for a whole year, you'd be 37 times better. It's hard to believe that these tiny changes make such a big difference. And because we don't see the change, it's not linear.
Yeah.
It goes in these peaks and troughs or peaks and plateaus. We need to stick the course long enough to see that change, that meaningful change. And if you break it down into the smallest element, you will see that change as you go. And that's really important.
So it's delaying gratification.
Well, no, I think if you are looking for change in your life, you need to break your goals down into the smallest sections possible so you can see
Okay.
goal progression as you go. And you need
Okay.
multiple pathways. So let's say, for example, Pete, you want to increase your cardiovascular fitness. Your
Yeah.
chosen way to do that is to swim every day, the bold and beautiful at Manly. When the seas are rough and the blue bottles are in, you could go for a jog along the beach. You're still
Yeah.
increasing your cardiovascular health. You've just chosen a different pathway. And that's what it's really
Yeah.
about. Multiple
Yeah.
pathways and then keeping it small.
Yeah, small steps, and thinking of that long, being satisfied with the small step today, but focusing very much on, well, I'm doing this for a long-term gain too, and it's going to multiply, right? It's like that interest effect when you're investing. Over time, it extrapolates.
Yeah, compounding interest. We talk often about you watch your super balance growing early in your career. It's absolutely doing nothing, but 30 years in, we really see that compounding effect. It's the same with your well-being. It's these small things that build over time. Like really, well-being is a platform of good habits that then grow over time. And because they're interconnected between social, physical, mental, spiritual, financial, career, they all sort of creep into each other and obviously support each other.
Yes.
But in financial theory, they talk about the best form of motivation is progress. So being able to see that you're progressing allows you to go, you know what, things are working, they might be slow, but at least we're moving forward. And that's really important to remember.
And like maybe in that case, would you recommend like keeping a checklist, like the days I've exercised this week, tick, 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 or something I can see?
Well, let me tell you, I'm going to show you something right now. When you build your ideal day, obviously comes with a workbook, but really what you're looking for is a habit change tracker. And you write down your chosen goal, the smallest thing you can think of, and then you start looking for a pattern. Were you able to do it? Were you able to get into bed by 9:30? Most days this week. And if it's no for the whole lot, you need to change your goal. Maybe it's 10:30. Maybe you've been a bit aggressive, but you need some kind of tracking. And you've already done your masters in coaching psychology, but the active learning loop is the most underrated tool that all of us need, which is you try something, you assess whether it works, and then you adjust it. And you spend your whole life in this active learning loop or reflective loop, seeing the progress only by reviewing whether it's worked or not.
Yes,
so I think it's really important.
Looks like there's an element of belief in this as well. Like it's belief in myself and also belief in the goal. Like how much, but when I'm coaching folks and they talk about goals, like coaching goals, and they've done nothing about this goal, like for a long period of time. Like they say, it might be a health goal. I want to lose 10 kilos, or it might be a professional goal. I'd like to do my MBA, whatever the goal might be. And I often get very curious about like how real that goal is. Does that mean you've got to change your beliefs, you've got to change your habits, or is that really a goal I'm keen on achieving or not? Can you see what I mean?
They definitely sound like any goal that goes for 2 years, like an MBA, probably needs a few sub goals in there. So
it does.
If your overall goal is to increase your attractiveness to the workforce or to increase your education, then that might be a lofty goal. How do you do that? I'm going to enroll in the MBA. That might be your first goal. But then you've got to do your first semester, second, third. I think it's breaking it down is really, really important. But I wanted to loop back on, you spoke about personality and identifying.
Yes.
And that's really important with habit change. James Clear talks a bit about this. And he says, once you start identifying who you are, let's say I want to have greater benevolence in my life. I want to help others. So I open the door for people as they walk into the bakery, for an example. That action is a vote for the kind of person I want to be. Open the door, that's a benevolent act, and it's working towards me, having greater, level of benevolence or volunteering or whatever it is. Every action is a vote for the kind of person you want to be. In your case, Pete, with your swimming multiple days of the week, every time you turn up to swimming is a vote for the kind of person you want to be, which is you want to be a better swimmer and you want to drink coffee with your buddies.
I like that. And it's curious you mentioned that. Clear. Yeah, I know James. I don't know him, but I know his work. I know James personally. It's curious you say that, though, because I was raised, if you like, or I became aware very early on that I love talking. I love running workshops and talking in groups. But one thing I wasn't so great at was listening. So one of my goals now is when I'm at the swim group and we had that social time afterwards, I ask questions and listen to the answers, and I measure myself by how much talking I do. I attempt to do as little as possible.
Yeah. Well, there's a good lesson that I suppose you spent 2 years listening with a coaching psychology masters. But if you drill into the most recent book, which is called Super Communicators, the best communicators of the world that are the ones that listen the most,
That's
not the
true.
ones
It's
that
true.
talk the most.
And at the best, and that was the big shift with me from going from running workshops to coaching, because running workshops is primarily about talking and
Yeah.
facilitating conversations,
Yeah.
whereas coaching is primarily about asking great questions and really listening to the answers,
Yeah.
not about talking at all, really. It's a very different skill set, which is one of the reasons I was so keen in getting involved in that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you go,
I wonder whether if you were to reflect on the Peter of the past versus the Peter of the future, and when you were asking open and closed questions, or asking the kind of inquiring type questions in your workshops that you've learned from coaching, whether your workshops are now better. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can bring the
okay,
skills of coaching into your workshop, even though in a workshop you're largely delivering information. So what we call
yes,
building awareness, and
yeah,
coaching is about embedding the action or the habit. And
it
they
is.
they run the two together.
It's interesting too. The way I've learnt more recently about coaching and teaching is that when I'm teaching or workshopping, I feel like I'm transferring information to people that they don't know. Right? I feel like I'm teaching them, giving them something. Whereas when I'm coaching, what I feel like I'm doing is I'm helping people find things that are already there, but they're not quite sure how to find them. And I'm
Mm.
asking them questions to help them find what they already know. I'm not actually, I'm just using coaching techniques to help them find these things, like find their beliefs, understand their personality, like understand who they really are and what they really want. Because I can't tell them that. I can't sit in a coaching chair and tell Duncan, this is who you are, this is what you should do. Only Duncan, only you know what makes you happy, right? Only you know what makes you feel good. Like who makes you feel good, what makes you feel good. I can't tell you that. I can
Yeah.
help you understand what it is and then help you understand how to go about getting more of what's going to make you feel great, right?
Well, in the coaching sort of wheel that you've got counselling, mentoring, pure coaching. You've got all these different forms, and you've got to
Yeah.
sort of adapt. Sometimes people need a bit of direction. You might need to tell a story that inspires people
Yeah,
to
yeah,
action,
that's
and
true.
that's not
Yeah.
pure coaching, but it might be guiding people in a certain direction. And I think that people are complex. Some
Oh,
people just need certain things at certain times,
yes. And
and
it's
off you
interesting
go.
you say complex and personality because the personality model I use, it's called Luminous Spark, and it measures it on three levels. It measures it on underlying personality, like who you really are. I can use that.
Yeah,
Your everyday, which is how you turn up at work or in the
yeah,
world, which can be different. Then you're overextended, which is how you are when you're stressed or when you're very anxious, right? And they can be quite different. They can be very different versions of you. One of the things I like to help people do is understand, like, who are you really? Like, what are your underlying traits that really serve you and make you happy, as compared
mm,
to who are you obliged to be when you're at work? And maybe who you're obliged to be is different than who you really are. And a great example I had a couple of days ago, there was a particular female executive I was working with, very senior. Underlying, she had huge levels of empathy. High, like by huge, I mean 90% empathy. Every day when she came to work, she demonstrated almost none, right? And when we looked at that, I said, I'm really curious about, like, where does the empathy go and why does it go? Why does it disappear or it disappear? And in her view, in her early days of her career, she thought empathy was soft and was too gentle, and she just partialed it out.
yeah,
So she needed to, like, reintroduce or find ways of reintroducing that.
yeah. Well, soft skills are pretty important these days.
Extremely, extremely, like the collaboration, the empathy, and all those good bits. So, are there? If I think about ideal days, are there different ideal days? Like, are there ideal? Because I'm imagining we don't always have the same day every day, right? That there's going to be different sorts of days, like an ideal family day, for example, or an ideal work day, or an ideal weekend day. Do you break it up like that, or is it one day?
The intention is to help, and my tagline is I help people be the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
We do
Okay.
that by building awareness. That's talking them, telling them a story that ignites their imagination about what's possible, We then, help them with their curiosity. Sometimes we use heart rate variability monitors like the one I've got here. First beat product that shows your levels of stress, how you're sleeping, all that kind of stuff. And then we try and embed that change with coaching psychology.
Okay.
Everyone's day will be different. There is no perfect day or no ideal day that is the same for anyone. In fact, there's probably no ideal day that is the same for that same person. It's always changing because we're on a trajectory of what we're trying to get to, and every day is different, and you've got to respond to those different parameters.
Okay.
But as I said earlier, 40% of all of our actions are habits, and if you think that some studies suggest between 40 and 80% of chronic disease and premature death is due to what's called lifestyle choices we make every day. So it's pretty clear that your lifestyle choices is responsible about 40% of all chronic disease and premature death. So these tiny things you do can make an extraordinary difference to how you live your life. And when you add social connection or your social environment, that's worth about 15%. So essentially, we're just shaping the direction of going, because everyone thinks it's genes, and genes are really responsible about 30% of your trajectory until you age about 80, and then the wheels start to fall off. But most of your life is within your hands. About 55% is really about kind of people you hang with, and the choice you made on exercise, food, and those other things.
So are there, I understand like each ideal day is unique to the individual. Are there some consistent things you recommend? Like one thing you mentioned then was like social connection and relationships. Is that one, would you recommend some things and say what social connection would be one? I guess health or exercise would be another. What was that the second one?
Well, I'll go through them. So if you think about the Harvard Grant study, it's been running for about 85 years. It's the study of Harvard sophomores. And when they interview them every year, and they're now interviewing their children and their children's children as we go through, the number one determinant of life satisfaction, which is different from happiness, but how you live a good life, is the number of meaningful connections you have in your life. So your social fitness or your social well-being. So that's number one. If you're surrounded by the right type of people, you tend to make better decisions. Even at the dinner table, if you eat with someone else, it modifies your habits. So when you start with the social connection, and then you've got recovery is probably the number one thing, especially in our society today, where sleep levels have been declining, in the last 80 or 100 years quite significantly. We know there's a really big impact if you don't sleep on your cognitive ability. The beta amyloid plaques that build up in your brains, these have causative effects for both Alzheimer's and dementia, don't get washed out if you don't get your 7 to 9 hours. And then how you exercise. So you might be aiming for cardiovascular fitness for exercise, but you've got to remember that your brain uses about 20% of the oxygen running through your body. So if you've got a healthy circulatory system pumping oxygen around the body, you're going to be better as well. There's weird things that also happen. So when you exercise, you get much better creative thinking outcomes, so divergent thinking outcomes. So they start all bleeding in together. If you rest well, you're more likely to exercise. If you exercise well, you're going to be more brain smart. You're going to be cleverer. You're going to see things, So they're all interrelated. So surround yourself with the right people. Get off Instagram, basically, and then because you've got the three environments. Your physical environment, what you have in the fridge, determines what you eat. The kind of people you hang with, your social environment determines what you do. And the last one's the digital environment, the kind of things you absorb, whether it's TikTok and Instagram or whether it's, more positive news stories that come through. And Johan Harari was actually in Sydney this week. I went to see him and had a nice chat with him. He wrote a book called Stolen Focus. I'm now a big fan of understanding the impact of social media, essentially, and the hooks they've got into us in order to sell advertising the whole time. So our ability to wrestle back our own attention is really, really important.
It is. I saw some Pew research just recently, Duncan, and they suggested that this is just in Americans. Americans have been never less likely to change their point of view after a social or digital interaction in recorded pew history. This was like 50 or 60 years. And the writer of the article was suggesting that was primarily social media, whose algorithms feed you more of what you already believe. Like if I think red's the best color, I'm going to get red, 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 blue, green, yellow. They're crap, right? It's all about red. Whatever I do, I'm going to get more of, and I'm going to get the other view as the enemy. Whereas if you think about social interaction, and quite apart from it not being good mentally, if I'm going to be very bigoted about what I think and what I feel, I'm not going to be very good socially because I'm going to be surrounded by people that think different things than me, which I find quite interesting. When I come across someone that thinks differently, I'm curious. I'm not angry. I'm thinking, wow, I'm really curious. Like not in an aggressive way. I'm really curious. How do you think that way? Where does that come from? How does that make you feel good, or how does it make you feel great? I find those people interesting, like different people.
Well, I think back on the tech thing you mentioned, it's more sinister than that, right? So
yeah.
Large corporations are hooking our attention to sell us more advertising. The longer you spend on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the more adverts you get. It's as simple as that. And then what they do is they dampen down good news stories and they accelerate stories that rage people. If you see something you don't like, you're more likely to comment on it. Now, there's a really interesting example of the stolen election of 2020. Of course, it wasn't stolen. But the 20 top stories about that election, so the most popular stories on Facebook, 20, 19 of them were false. And yet they did nothing to bring them down. So literally the world is raging with misinformation because that's what sells advertising.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
And so we need somehow to either flip the switch or control this kind of stuff because, you know, you think about China and places like that, and this is a Johan Harari piece. So they've got TikTok, right, in China, of course. But the kids are only allowed 45 minutes per day. You're allowed a licensed amount of minutes per day. And they're only feeding content to the kids which are about excelling in schools, being a good citizen, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. The stuff that's been served up in the Western liberal, you know, it's really distracting for kids and adults alike. And we really need to wrestle our attention back. And this is why we can't have, you know, meaningful and honest conversations because people are getting different information.
Yeah, that's true. And also there was some parallel research by Apple on how many conversations people have. This was the only way they could measure is by phone conversations. Yeah. And it had consistently fallen for 25 years until the average conversation now is like 90 seconds. That this is on a phone, right? On what's called a phone, which no one actually uses as a phone, but it's still called a phone. So we're talking less. But the other insidious thing, I think, and you talked about advertising. I spent about 12 years working in big ad agencies, and the way we made ads was by showing somebody with a problem. David Ogilvy said it well. He said, if someone's got a sore, scratch it. Like, hey, Duncan, that's a pretty bad sore you've got there, pretty bad sting you've got there. Like, remind you about how bad the sting is. And then you think, shit, it is pretty bad. It's better, worse than I thought it was. And then introduce the cure, right? Yeah. So are you lonely, sad, depressed, whatever you might be? Yeah, put some itching powder on it and then give you the cure. And the cure works better if you, we called it skillfully building the pain. Yeah. Like build the pain. And then introduce the cure. So his view is that this is like, is it China or is it the big multinationals doing this, or is it both? In his view.
Well, you can see what China are doing. They're limiting, you know, the impact of it on their citizens. You know, they're investing in the future technology. They're doing all that kind of stuff. And in the Western world, they're just letting it flow. But I suppose going back to your ideal day, you know, there are a lot of things you can do as an individual. You know, if you're waiting for the government to regulate your life in order for you to live your ideal day, I think you're going to miss the boat. So we need to think about the small intentional choice we can make as individuals to do that. And I think a lot of it is also about your mindset. You know, obviously Carol Dweck's learning or growth mindset, you probably never thought earlier, a couple of years ago, that you could have a podcast series, and here you are today. You know, you've probably got 100 podcasts under your belt, and you're doing some great stuff. But being positive is also important. So optimism and positivity makes a big difference, because people who are optimistic and or positive plan for the future. They save money for their retirement. They stock their fridge with leafy green vegetables, the modified Mediterranean diet, so they can eat better, to give them the energy to do the things they want to do, So I think being positive and optimistic, which of course much of the world is not at the moment, controlling the small things you can control and putting some positivity in them is really important.
And the way I see optimism, I look at the Seligman way, and you think about Seligman, and he's suggesting that it's explanatory style. It's the way that you explain things to yourself and others, which is great, which means it's adaptable and you can change it if you understand how to change it. So if you are, because some folks might think, well, I'm a pessimist. I think pessimistically. Well, if that is true, like technically true that you're pessimistic, it can be changed. And it's changed by how you answer certain questions that you ask yourself. And that could change. And I guess the more optimistic I am, the more likely I am that I can have my ideal day.
Yeah.
Than if I'm,
Look, we're not suggesting here that Pollyanna type, personality is the way to go here. But the majority of the population has a negative bias, and hence why the social media is so good at harnessing into that. But you can change your optimism over time. The Learnt Helplessness piece by Martin Seligman that you've studied before. But we can reframe, and, just because things didn't go as well as they could have, we can look for the small wins and reframe that as a success going forward. So I think it is important to not be so optimistic that you don't think that the car heading towards you is going to swerve around you. You need to be sensible about it.
Yeah, practical.
You need to be practical, but having some optimism to say, you know what, I haven't done this before, but in other scenarios where I've tried something new, it's turned out okay. I'm going to give it a go. I think that's really important.
And I think that's where it circles back to social support too, because if you've got people around you encouraging you, that is going to help. I was interested too when you talk about these small steps. I'm a huge fan of meditation, both personally and also for my coaching clients. And I don't have like research on this, but I know anecdotally with the clients I work with, I always prescribe meditation. At the beginning and end of each coaching conversation, we meditate together, right?
Yeah.
And just for 10 minutes. And I've just done a small series of videos looking at 10 reasons to meditate for 10 minutes a day for 10 days, like as a way to say, just meditate for 10 minutes a day for 10 days. And if it doesn't work, quit, right? But I know it's going to work. I know it's going to change your life. And here's the 10 reasons why it's a great idea. To me, that's a micro step. It's only 10 minutes. You're thinking, and I got reminded about that when you talk about being on TikTok or your favorite social media. Most people will be spending more than 10 minutes a day on social media. I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking more like an hour or more of social media a day. So if you took that hour, knocked it down to 50 minutes and did 10 minutes of meditation instead of that extra 10 minutes of social media, did that for 10 days in a row, and ideally do it in the morning because it tends to work better in the morning, your life will start dramatically changing anyway, just by itself, just by doing that.
Yeah.
Like one micro step. Yeah.
Well, that's actually quite a big step. If you think, I think the stats are, and you can look this up, but I think it's around, we spend 46 hours a week on our screens. That's a combination of work and our phones.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time. That's a number of years of our lives gone there. And, I would challenge you to say, what is meditation? And I would say it's a reflective practice. Why couldn't you just start people off with 3 deep breaths? What can you do in 30 seconds or less? Because 10 minutes for a non-meditator, like, you're dreaming, buddy. So how could you break it down?
You could break it down to 3 breaths. You could break it down to mindful walking. You could just, the next time you're walking in the morning, just do it mindfully. You could break it down by saying, well, 3 times a day, I'm going to feel my toes inside my shoes.
Yeah.
Right. I can make it micro if I want to make it micro. Yeah. I mean, when I talk about meditation, it's got two rules. It's got, one is a focusing device, which is usually your breath, right? The second is a non-judgmental attitude about what arises. So I'm not trying to solve or fix anything. I'm just focusing on my breath, and I've got a non-judgmental attitude. Like I'm watching a Netflix show, which happens to be my life. I'm not judging it. I'm just watching it, just observing it. And a lot of people, you can use guidance. I mean, I've recorded meditations. There's great apps like Calm. There's awesome short guided meditations. The reason for 10 minutes is that the literature suggests that, like, between 6 and 8 minutes, you start getting really profound impacts. It takes you about a minute to get in and about a minute to get out. So 10 minutes is about the ideal prescription. That's what I recommend. But I can see your point. That could be a huge step. But you know what I love? You'd love this too. When people say to me, oh, I tried meditation once and it didn't work. I tried it once and it didn't work. Like saying I went to the gym once and it didn't work, right? Or I tried talking to a girl once and it didn't work. So it's not a very big sample size, is it? To try something once and it not working. You think, well, you might want to try it more than once. You know what I mean?
Well, we've got to lean into the strengths. So it might be, what could be a challenge for some people is like, why don't you go to the loo without your phone? Why don't you go for a dog walk in the morning without taking your phone? Like, why don't we try and reduce the distraction first before we get people into the, obviously, I did the search inside yourself it was probably 10 or 12 years ago. They came to Australia as a Google technique. And it was interesting. And then when I took that and tried to apply it into the workplace, everyone's so cognitively busy. We need to go back to first principles just to create the space for people to do something different. We know that it works, but if you haven't created the space or the opening, then it's not going to work long term.
Yeah, I like your micro steps. Just don't take the phone with you. Walk the dog, don't take the phone. Like actually pay attention to your surroundings or the puppy or the...
Yeah.
The other one I find interesting, you see people at dinner or lunch or breakfast together and they're watching their phone. They're actually with somebody and watching the phone. You think, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you do that? How do you have dinner with somebody and be on your phone at the same time?
You need to be not judgmental in your view of others as well, Pete. This could be, you might need to listen more and be a bit less judgmental because you don't know what's going on in their life. They could be they could be texting each other for all you know, unless you're close enough.
Yes, that's true. Maybe I'm too judgy. I'm just curious. I'm just curious. How do you do that? How do you have dinner with somebody looking at your phone? I'm just curious. How do you do that?
They might have just basically been on a 4-week overseas cruise to Antarctica and spend all their time together, and they're just having a little a little relapse time, but doing something, a shared experience together, which is staring at your phone. They could be. We just don't know what's going on.
Or they could be extreme introverts.
It could be,
and they don't like that that contact. That's very cool, Duncan. I could talk to you for days on this. I find you a very interesting and brilliant guy to talk to. I'm going to put in the show notes.
Very generous.
The show links to reach out to you if people would like to do that workshop, which sounds incredibly worthwhile to do, and they can design their particular ideal day.
Correct.
But in the meantime, I just wanted to thank you for being a guest on Growth Tales today.
Yeah, great, Pete. It's great to be asked onto the show, and I know you have quite a few listeners who are broad in nature, so hopefully I've been able to share a little bit about building your ideal day. But I just wanted to close with something which I hopefully might resonate with your listeners. So have it change about the small intentional choice we make every day. That's about, making it as small as possible and heading in the right trajectory. But I want us also to think about what we can do for others. So post the pandemic, we've had a almost 20% increase in what's called benevolence. That's volunteering, donations, and helping strangers. I think the social connections that we have make such an impact on others. And we all need to focus a bit more on helping others. There are lots of people who are suffering out there at the moment. So even just being a better listener or, that kind of things can make a really big difference. So I've truly benefited from people who took the time 10 years ago to listen to someone talking about me believing wellbeing was going to be a really big thing in the future when many didn't believe so. And I've benefited from that. And we all need to, take our own time to listen to others and hopefully encourage them to follow their own dreams and build your ideal day.
Thanks, Duncan. See you, mate. Bye.
See you, Pete. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Duncan. You can tell that Duncan and I do know each other. We do swim in the same bold and beautiful swim squad. We've got that and a lot of mutual colleagues in common. What I loved about Duncan's approach is how prescriptive it is. And I mean that in a generous way. He's got very useful tools and processes to help us all have a more ideal day and be more useful in our communities and happier in ourselves. If you'd like to reach out to Duncan to learn more about the ideal day, I'll leave his contact details in the show notes. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can find me at peteranthonyconsulting.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you next time on Growth Tales.